Hello everyone, and I wish you all a beautiful day. Today we'll discover the story of Khang and son Thon, where one simple banana harvest becomes a test of patience, pride, and love. Can sharing one heavy burden change two hearts forever? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Morning came slowly over Khang's small house in the mountains. It did not arrive with noise or hurry. It came gently with pale light spreading behind the dark trees, turning the sky from deep blue to soft purple, then to the warm color of ripe fruit. The old stone walls still held the coolness of the night. Green vines climbed over them as if trying to keep the home hidden from the world. In the garden, dew rested on the wide banana leaves. Every drop caught the first sunlight and shone like glass. The air smelled of wet earth, young grass, and faint sweetness. For a while, everything was quiet. Only the birds in the forest had begun their morning songs, calling from places no one could see. Khang had been awake long before the sun. He stood barefoot on the stone courtyard, his eyes fixed on the banana grove beyond the house. His face was calm, but inside his thoughts had already started moving. Today was not an ordinary day. Today the bananas had to be harvested. For almost a year, he had cared for those trees. He had carried water when the dry season cracked the soil. He had dug trenches when heavy rain threatened to drown the roots. He had checked the leaves for pests and worked under the sun until his shirt was soaked. Now the bunches were full, heavy, ready, and that made him hopeful. But hope, for a man like Khang, always came with worry. A good harvest did not mean anything until it reached the market. A beautiful bunch of bananas could still be rejected. A fair price could still become a bad bargain. One wrong buyer, one slow morning, and months of labor could feel as if they had fallen through his fingers. Just then, Thon stepped out from the house. She carried 2 bowls of hot congee. Steam rose from them and drifted into the morning air. The smell of rice and ginger was simple, but comforting. The kind of smell that made a poor house feel rich for a moment. "You're awake early again," she said softly. Khang turned toward her. The hard lines around his eyes eased a little when he saw her. He did not smile often, but with Thon, even a small smile came more easily. "Today we have to cut the bananas," he said. "If we reach the market early, we may get a better price." Thon handed him 1 bowl. "Then I'll go with you." Khang paused. He looked toward the forest path, still damp with dew. The road to the grove was not easy. It climbed and dropped, twisted between roots and stones, and after a night of moisture, the red soil could become slippery. "It's far," he said, "and the path will be wet. You might get tired." Thon shook her head. Her voice remained gentle, but there was something firm beneath it. "Your work is my work too." Khang looked at her for a moment. He knew that tone. When Thon spoke like that, there was no point arguing. More than that, he did not truly want to argue. A part of him, the part that had carried too much alone for too long, felt lighter just hearing her say those words. So he only nodded. They sat together on the worn stone porch and ate their congee while the mist moved around the garden. The meal was plain, just rice, water, ginger, and a little salt. But in the quiet of the morning, it felt warmer than any feast. Neither of them spoke for a while. They simply listened to the birds, to the leaves, to the slow breathing of the mountain. After a few spoonfuls, Thon looked toward the banana trees. "How long have you been growing them?" "Almost a year," Khang answered. "There were times I thought I would lose everything. Too much rain, then too much sun. Some weeks the leaves turned yellow and I kept thinking the roots had failed. But somehow they held on. Thon smiled a little. Like you. Khang gave a soft laugh. I'm not a banana tree. No, she said, but you also held on. Her words were simple, but they stayed with him. Khang looked down at his bowl and did not answer right away. He was used to people seeing his work. He was used to people judging the result. But Thon saw the struggle behind it. She saw the nights of worry, the tired hands, the fear he never said aloud. And somehow that mattered more than he expected. When they finished eating, Khang prepared the tools. He sharpened his old machete until the blade caught the light. He coiled the ropes for tying the banana bunches and picked up the long bamboo shoulder pole, smooth from years of carrying heavy loads. Each tool had its own memory. Then they started down the forest path. The ground was damp beneath their feet. Thon walked carefully, lifting the hem of her clothes slightly as she followed him. The forest was still cool, with sunlight falling in thin lines through the leaves above. Somewhere nearby, a bird called 3 times, then fell silent. Not long after, Thon slipped. Khang turned at once and caught her arm before she fell. His hand was firm, steady, and warm. Careful, he said. I'm fine, she answered, though her breath caught a little. But she did not pull her hand away immediately. For a brief moment, they stood like that on the narrow path, surrounded by trees, with only the sound of leaves moving above them. No big promise, no dramatic words. Yet in that small touch, something quiet passed between them. Trust. They continued walking. The path grew steeper. Roots crossed the ground like old ropes. Wet leaves stuck to their sandals. Khang walked ahead, clearing branches when needed, warning her where the stones were loose. Thon followed without complaint, though he could hear her breathing harder as the climb went on. Nearly an hour later, the forest opened. Before them stood the banana grove. Thon stopped. The trees were full, their leaves wide and green, their heavy bunches hanging beneath them like rewards for every difficult month Khang had endured. Some bunches were so large, the stalks bent under their weight. The sight was simple, but to Khang it felt almost sacred. They're beautiful, Thon whispered. Khang looked at the bananas, and for the first time that morning, pride rose above his worry. All my work is here, he said quietly, every bit of it. He climbed onto the base of one tree and raised the machete. Thon stepped closer, ready to help. The blade flashed once in the morning light, and when the first heavy bunch began to fall, Thon realized that this harvest would test far more than their strength. The banana bunch came down faster than Thon expected. Khang had warned her to stand ready, but no warning could prepare her for the full weight of it. The stalk cracked, the leaves trembled, and the whole green bunch swung downward into her arms. Thon braced herself, but the moment it touched her hands, her knees bent. Oh, she gasped, stumbling back. Khang jumped down and caught the load before it pulled her off balance. His hands covered hers for a moment as he steadied both the bananas and her. I told you it was heavy, he said, though there was no scolding in his voice. Thon looked at the bunch, then at him, and laughed through her breath. Heavy? This feels like carrying a small mountain. Khang smiled. Then today we carry mountains. That small joke eased the tension, and they began to work. Khang cut the bunches one by one, careful not to bruise the fruit. Thon laid leaves on the ground and helped arrange each bunch neatly. Her arms soon began to ache, and sweat gathered near her temples, but she did not complain. Every time Khang looked at her, she only nodded as if to say, keep going. The morning grew warmer. The work was hard, but there was a quiet rhythm to it. Cut, catch, lift, tie, rest for one breath, then begin again. After several bunches had been gathered, Khang paused and wiped his forehead. His shoulders were tight from the repeated lifting, but his eyes were bright. Thon noticed that look. It was not the look of a man chasing money. It was the look of someone seeing proof that his patience had not been wasted. She sat beneath a tree root and asked, "Khang, if one day you had a lot of money, would you still work like this?" He stopped coiling a rope and looked at her. The question seemed simple, but it made him quiet. He looked around the grove, at the trees he had watered through drought and protected through storms. "I think I would," he said. "Why?" she asked. "Because this work keeps me alive," Khang answered. "Not only with food, not only with money. When I plant something and watch it grow, I feel connected to the earth. I feel like my hands still have meaning." Thon listened without interrupting. Khang lowered his voice. "Some people think farming is only about selling what you grow. But even when life is slow, something is still happening. Roots are growing under the ground. Fruit is forming little by little. That teaches a man to endure." Thon looked at him for a long moment. In that answer, she saw another side of Khang. Not just the quiet man who carried burdens without talking. She saw someone who had made peace with a difficult life because he had learned how to find meaning inside it. They rested under the shade and shared the rice balls Thon had packed. The food was simple, but after the long morning, it tasted better than anything they could have bought. "Eat more," Thon said, offering him another rice ball. "You have done most of the heavy work." Khang took it and smiled. "It tastes good. I did not cook anything special." "No," he said, "but eating it with you makes it better." Thon turned her face away, pretending to look at the grove. But Khang saw the small smile she tried to hide. By midday, they had tied the best bunches to the long bamboo pole. Khang bent down, slipped the pole across his shoulders, and slowly stood. The bamboo curved under the weight. His jaw tightened. The load was heavier than he wanted Thon to know. "Can you carry it?" she asked. "I can. Do not lie." He gave a tired laugh. "Then I can carry it, but I will not say it is easy." Thon stepped close and adjusted one of the ropes so the bunches would not swing too much. "Then we go slowly." And they did. The path back was harder than the path in. Khang had to balance the heavy pole with each step. If he moved too quickly, the bananas swayed. If he stepped on loose mud, the weight pulled at his shoulders. Thon walked beside him now instead of behind him. When the trail narrowed, she steadied the hanging bunches. When branches blocked the way, she pushed them aside. For Khang, the burden was still heavy. His shoulders burned, his legs trembled on the steeper parts. But Thon's presence changed the feeling of it. The load had not become lighter, yet he no longer felt alone beneath it. "Are you tired?" she asked after a long silence. "No," he said automatically. She gave him a look. He sighed. "A little." Thon smiled. "Good. At least you still know how to tell the truth." Khang chuckled. "With you beside me, even tiredness feels different." By the time they reached the market road, the sun was high. The quiet forest gave way to noise. Vendors called out prices. Buyers argued and moved from basket to basket with sharp eyes. The smell of vegetables, fish, smoke, and dust filled the air. Khang found a small empty space near the edge of the market and lowered the bananas carefully. For a moment they stood there, breathing hard, looking at the fruit that had taken nearly a year to grow and nearly all their strength to carry. Now came the part Khang feared most. A woman stopped first. She looked at the bananas, touched one with 2 fingers, and frowned. "How much?" Khang named a fair price. "They were cut this morning," Khang explained. "In a few days, they will ripen well, sweet and firm." But the woman had turned away. Thon watched her disappear into the crowd. That was fast. Khang forced himself to stay calm. The first buyer rarely buys. More people came. Some asked the price. Some pressed the fruit too hard. Some made faces as if they had already decided not to buy before they even stopped. Each person walked away, and with each one, Thon's hope faded a little. Khang stood still, but his hand tightened around the bamboo pole. Then, near the late afternoon, a well-dressed merchant approached. His eyes were sharp, his smile thin, and the way he inspected the bananas made Thon's chest tighten before he even spoke. "These are not even in size," he said, "and the stems are wet." Khang kept his voice steady. "They were harvested this morning." The merchant nodded slowly, then named a price so low that Thon's heart dropped. And in that heavy moment, Khang looked at the harvest, looked at Thon, and had to decide how much of his pride he could afford to keep. For a few seconds, Khang said nothing. The market noise kept moving around them, but to Thon, everything felt strangely quiet. The merchant's offer still hung in the air, cold and heavy. Thon leaned closer and whispered, "That is too low." Khang heard her, but his eyes remained on the bananas. He saw more than fruit in front of him. He saw the mornings when he had carried water before breakfast. He saw the afternoons when the sun burned his neck until his skin stung. He saw the nights when wind bent the leaves, and he lay awake, wondering if the crop would be gone by morning. Almost a year of work was sitting there on the ground, and now one man was trying to make it small. Khang lifted his eyes to the merchant. "At that price, I lose money," he said. "These bananas took almost a year to grow." The merchant shrugged. "Then take them home. There are other sellers." It was cruel, but Khang knew the market did not care about tired hands. It did not care how long a crop had taken to grow. The market only cared who could wait longer, who could walk away first, and who needed the sale more. Khang needed the sale. He took a slow breath. His pride resisted, but his mind stayed clear. If he carried the bananas home, some might bruise. If he waited until tomorrow, the market might be worse. If he refused every hard bargain, his work could still end with nothing. So he made a choice. "If you take all of them," Khang said, his voice low but steady, "I can lower the price a little." The merchant looked at him, then looked again at the bananas. He pressed one stem, turned one bunch, and stood silently, making them wait. Thon held her breath. Khang did not move. Finally, the merchant nodded. "All right, I will take them all." Thon stared at him. "All of them?" she asked. "All of them," the merchant repeated. Only then did Khang's shoulders loosen. The tightness around his mouth softened, and a tired smile rose slowly on his face. It was not the smile of someone who had become rich. It was the smile of a man who had crossed a narrow bridge without falling. The merchant paid, counted the bunches, and called 2 helpers to carry them away. Thon watched the bananas disappear, one bunch after another, and with each one she felt the weight of the day leaving them. When the last bunch was gone, the empty space looked strange. In the morning, that harvest had seemed like a mountain. Now only dust, rope marks, and a few torn leaves remained. Khang folded the bamboo pole under his arm. "You sold everything," Thon said, still in disbelief. Khang nodded. "Everything." She smiled then, not loudly, not with celebration, but with the deep relief of someone who had been holding her breath for too long. Khang looked at her, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself to feel the happiness fully. They left the market as evening began to settle. The noise behind them grew softer with each step. The road home was familiar, but it felt different now. Khang's shoulders still ached, but there was no heavy pole pressing into them. Thon walked beside him, lighter too, her steps quicker than in the morning. "Today I was happy," she said. Khang looked at her. "Because we sold the bananas." She shook her head. "Not only that." "Then why?" "Because I went with you," she said. "Because I saw how hard it was. Because we did it together." Khang slowed his steps. Those words reached a place in him he had kept closed for many years. He had always believed that a man should carry his worries quietly. If the work was hard, he did it. If the price was unfair, he endured it. If he was tired, he said nothing. But today, Thon had walked the same slippery path, lifted the same heavy fruit, waited through the same disappointment, and stood beside him when the decision hurt. She had not taken the burden away. She had made it shared. And that changed everything. When they reached home, the sky had turned dark blue. Smoke drifted from the kitchen area, and the small oil lamp inside the house cast a warm circle of light across the wooden table. The day had begun with worry, but it was ending with peace. "What should we eat tonight?" he asked. Thon looked into their small basket and laughed. "Whatever is left." "Then I will cook," Khang said. She raised an eyebrow. "You?" "Yes, but you have to help." "I am not sure that makes me feel safe," she teased. Khang picked up a knife with exaggerated confidence. "Then tonight, we both take the risk." Soon the kitchen filled with the smell of smoke, vegetables, and rice. Their cooking was clumsy. Khang cut the carrots too large, and Thon laughed until she had to cover her mouth. "Are you feeding people or buffalo?" she asked. "Large pieces fill the stomach faster," he said seriously. "That is not how cooking works." "Then teach me." "I also do not know enough to teach you." "Then we learn together." The words were simple, but they made Thon quiet for a moment. Learn together. It sounded like cooking, but it felt like something much bigger. At last, they sat at the table with their uneven meal. Some vegetables were too soft, some were too large. The rice had stuck slightly to the pot. But Khang took one bite and nodded. "It is good." Thon looked at him carefully. "Really?" "Yes," he said, "because we made it together." This time she did not look away from his smile. Outside, night settled over the mountain. The cicadas began their steady song, and the forest disappeared into darkness. But inside the small house, the lamp burned warmly. It lit their faces, the wooden table, the simple bowls, and the quiet joy resting between them. The day had not been perfect. The path had been slippery, the harvest had been heavy, the market had been harsh. Yet somehow, by facing it side by side, they had found something stronger than a good price. They had found the beginning of a partnership. And as Khang looked at Thon across the small table, he understood that this was only the first test. Ahead of them would be harder seasons, colder mornings, sharper bargains, and questions neither of them could answer yet. But tonight, under the small yellow lamp, one truth felt certain. Whatever came next, they would no longer face it alone.
Khang thức dậy trước bình minh, lo lắng và vô mặt Chúa mà anh đã chăm sóc hơn năm trời. Hôn nhất quyết đi cùng anh và cả hai cùng nhau bước trên con đường chân chợ. Trong rừng đến vườn chuối, họ chặt bác và một cái môn chuối nặng chịu. Sự phối hợp thầm lặng của họ hé lòng bút nó liên kết sâu sắc hơn. Tại chợ, người mua từ chối trái cây hoặc đôi giá không công bằng. Thử hết sự kiên nhẫn và lòng tự trọng của Khang. Cuối cùng, một thương lái đồng ý mua hết, mang lại sự trân nhậm của ngày vất vả. Trên đường về, Thon và nhận cô hạnh phúc vì cùng anh vượt qua khó khăn. Tối hôm đó họ nấu ăn đơn giản, cười về những sai lầm của mình và nhận ra gánh nặng chúng của họ đã trở thành khởi đầu mối quan hệ đối tác thật sự và niềm tin bền vững thầm lặng.